He was chaos before the crowd was ready. Too fast, too fierce, too young to be managed. Alun Evans walked into football like a wildfire and set everything alight. He looked like a boy band lead, but played like a street fighter with a ball. Quick feet, raw power. A stare that didn't blink. He was Keegan before Keegan. The flash, the fight, the future, in a face that looked like cinema and punched like reality. And for a brief moment, the future of English football wore his name. But this system never liked wild gifts. One day, he was the next great hope. The next, he was a problem. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't follow the script. He played with fire and sometimes got burned. But when the game turned its back on him, he never begged to be let back in. No farewell match, no headline send-off, no golden legacy. Just a man with scars, silence, and a flash of brilliance you never quite forgot. This isn't a tribute soaked in medals or myths. It's a reminder of a name they tried to forget, and the fire he left behind. Subscribe if you believe football should honor the ones who burned too hot, not just the ones who stayed in line. Because Alun Evans didn't just arrive. He exploded and left the smoke in their lungs for years. Born on 30th April 1949 in Kidderminster, Worcestershire, Alun Evans came from steel, sweat, and sharp boots. The kind of place where you didn't dream of glory, you earned it. Wolves spotted it early. And in November 1967, at just 18 years old, Evans made his first division debut. He didn't ease in. He crashed through the door. Defenders were stunned. He ran like a striker with no past to protect and no future to fear. By the time the crowd caught its breath, he'd already earned headlines. They called him the next big thing. Wolves had never seen a teenager like this, and neither had the country. Only months later, the biggest clubs in England were circling. And one of them wasn't just watching. They were ready to make history. In September 1968, history was rewritten. Liverpool paid £100,000, a British record fee for a teenager, to bring Alun Evans to Anfield. No one that young had cost that much, but Bill Shankly didn't hesitate. He'd seen something no one else had. He said Evans had the heart of a lion and the speed of a fighter jet. Shankly didn't want the safe option. He wanted a game changer. And Evans was exactly that. He arrived at Anfield like a storm on the horizon. Hair wild, face young, eyes burning. He wasn't polished, he was explosive. 20 September 1968. Evans made his debut for Liverpool against Leicester City. It took him just one match to ignite the cop. He scored, and made everyone believe the risk had been worth it. The fans roared his name, and for a moment, Liverpool looked into the future and saw fire. He was only 19 years old, but he carried himself like he'd been forged for the big stage. No fear, no waiting period, just impact. This wasn't just a signing, it was a statement. Liverpool had gambled big, and Alun Evans made it feel like destiny. On 10th of March 1971, under the lights at Anfield, Liverpool faced Bayern Munich in the Fairs Cup. One of Europe's most disciplined sides, built to absorb pressure, trained to suffocate joy. And then came Alun Evans. He scored 3 goals that night, a hat-trick against the Germans. Every touch was lethal, every finish a firework. It wasn't just brilliance, it was defiance. He ran like he was being chased by time, played like the match might disappear if he blinked. And for those 90 minutes, Evans looked like the man who would define the decade. The cop went feral. Even hardened journalists called it one of the great European nights. Shankly, usually measured, was ecstatic. He said, "The boy is pure dynamite, a player for the big occasion." He was only 21, but he had just dismantled one of the continent's best. It should have been the beginning of everything. But football, like fame, is fickle. He had the pace. He had the hunger. He had Europe at his feet. But fate doesn't take form, tackles. Just when Alun Evans looked set to become the face of English football, injuries shattered his momentum. A nightclub glass attack in December 1969 left him with facial scars and out for over 2 months, and a cartilage injury against Dinamo Bucharest in November 1970 required surgery and sidelined him for 4 months. He was never quite the same again. His speed dulled. His explosiveness faded, and in a squad that demanded constant fire, slowing down meant being left behind. Shankly brought in new blood. Competition stiffened. Evans was no longer the crown jewel. He was now a question mark. He fought, always did, but consistency became elusive. He'd shine one week, disappear the next. Not from lack of effort, but from a body that no longer obeyed the flame inside. And then came the final cut. Kevin Keegan. You couldn't write it more cruelly. The press called Keegan the next Alun Evans. Only this time the dream came true. Keegan delivered what Evans once promised. And suddenly, Evans was the past. At just 23 years old. In 1972, the curtain fell. Alun Evans was sold to Aston Villa for £72,000, a club in the second division, a world away from the roar of Anfield. He wasn't finished, but he wasn't Liverpool's future either. Not with Keegan flying, and not with Shankly already plotting the next great side. At Villa Park, Evans showed flashes, reminders of the wildfire that once shook Europe. But the magic came in bursts now. Brilliant goals, yes. Moments of electricity, yes. But never again the blaze that had made headlines. He moved on to Walsall in 1975, then across the world to Australia, joining clubs like South Melbourne, Morwell Falcons, and Sandringham City. Each move felt like a whisper from a man the system had once screamed about. No media frenzy, no farewell from the cop. Just a slow fade into the backdrop of a game that had already crowned its new prince. But wherever he played, from England's muddy lower tiers to the distant heat of the Australian pitch, one thing never changed. Alun Evans still played like it meant everything. Before the stadiums chanted Keegan's name, before the shirts bore the flash of Dalglish, before the headlines obsessed over flair and fire, there was Alun Evans, the first teenage transfer that made the nation blink, the first bold risk Liverpool took on raw lightning. He came before the brand, before the money, before football learned to market rebellion. But he paid the price for being first. No statue, no pundits calling him a pioneer, no framed shirt at the museum, no red carpet rolled out for what he began, just old fans who remember the blur. The goal against Bayern, the night he destroyed Derby, the flash of hair and hunger across the pitch. Ask them, and they'll tell you he had something. Something untrained, something wild, something too early, but never forgotten. He didn't invent the game, but he shook it just enough to make room for the next greats. When the cheers faded and the boots were hung, Alun Evans didn't vanish. He just walked away, quietly like he always did. No interviews, no desperate returns. Just a man who gave football his youth and then gave himself the rest. After retiring in 1985, he settled in Melbourne, Australia, where he owns a painting and decorating company. He has also worked as a used car salesman and delivery driver. And then, like the flicker of a flare, disappeared from the headlines entirely, but not from those who remembered. Liverpool fans still whispered his name, those who saw that debut against Leicester, that goal against Bayern, that raw promise in a boy who wasn't supposed to burn that bright, that young. No pundit role, no coaching badge. Just Alun Evans, the one who came early, shook the world for a moment, and then chose a different kind of peace. Today, Alun Evans is 76 years old. Living far from the noise of Anfield, far from the headlines that once wrote his name in bold. There's no Hall of Fame for him, no grand tribute aired on television. Even in the clubs where he once burned brightest, his name is barely whispered. But for those who remember, Evans was more than just a player. He was a warning shot, a rebel spark before rebellion had a place in English football. He arrived before the world was ready, and by the time it caught up, it had forgotten his name. That's why we tell it now. Because if football only honors those who finished safely, then it's guilty of erasing the ones who dared to begin differently. Subscribe if you believe legends don't need medals, just memory. Because Alun Evans lit the fire, even if history tried to stamp it out.